To these people, huh? All right, so they're going to return the ark. Obviously, it's not doing well. It was in Philistine country for 7 months. When you get a chance this week, be sure and check out the map that's in your packet, and it talks about, it kind of shows you the pattern of how they sent it here, there, and everywhere to get it to go. It's the road of the ark, just to kind of show you that. And you know, one of the things I neglected to mention in the last chapter that's kind of interesting is that this god of Dagon has caused some problems just previous to this with another one of God's people, and that's Samson. We read in Judges chapter 16 that when the Philistines took Samson, well, I'm just going to read right here. The Philistines took him, they put out his eyes and brought him down to Gaza. This is Judges chapter 16. They bound him with fetters, and he became a grinder in the prison. This is Samson, the one who lived right around the same time, just a little bit earlier. However, the hair on his head began to grow again after it had been shaven. Here's the part that fits with today. Now the lords of the Philistines, that's those people that that were part of this other chapter, gathered together to offer a great sacrifice to Dagon, their god, and to rejoice. And they said, "Our god Dagon has delivered into our hands Samson, our enemy." And when the people saw him, they praised their god Dagon, for they said, "Our God has delivered into our hands our enemy, the destroyer of our land, and the one who has multiplied our dead." So when Samson pushes the pillars of the temple and it falls down on him, and remember that story? It's the temple of Dagon that he's in when this happens. And so there's quite a bit of destruction, and these people are all very familiar with this god Dagon. All right, that was actually supposed to go with last chapter. So 7 months the ark has been roaming around, so the Philistines call for their own priests. Don't think they're talking about anyone else. Their own priests and the diviners, and said, "What are we going to do with the ark of the Lord? Tell us how we should send it to its place." So they know it needs to go, right? They just want to know, what do we do? How do we do this correctly? And who are they seeking the answer from? Their priests of Dagon, the diviners. Is that a good place for them to go?
No.
Not really, but God's going to work with that. God is going to work with that in a mighty way. However, there's some things that are going to happen, and they actually are going to be given some kind of bad advice along with it, but God's going to work with it. So they said in verse 3, "If you send away the ark of the God of Israel, do not send it empty, but by all means return it to him with a trespass offering. Then you will be healed, and it will be known to you why his hand is not removed from you." First of all, is the ark empty?
No, it has those things in it.
It has those items. Remember what was in it?
Moses' rod.
Aaron's rod,
Manna.
10 commandments, and the jar of manna. So we know those things are in it. So what they're talking about when they say don't send it away empty is that they're talking about a secondary treasure chest full of goods that they want to send. Something besides just the ark. Something secondary is going to be sent with them. We're going to see some more details on that. Now, a trespass offering, that's something that the Jews are familiar with. What would you give a trespass offering for? Evidently the Philistines did it with their god Dagon too. What would it be sent? What would be
For sin.
for sin? In this case, it would be for theft. All right? So in case the God of Israel thinks that you've stolen the ark, which they sort of had, and taken it back, let's send a trespass offering back so that he'll remove his hand from you, and you'll know that, everything's really cool now. And they said, well, what is the trespass offering which we should return to him, O wise ones? And they answered, well, we think 5 golden tumors and 5 golden rats, according to the number of the lords of the Philistines. For the same plague was on all of you and your lords. So here's the idea where even though 3 are mentioned in our last one and nothing is there, it appears that all 5 of them got a taste of what was going on. So they're going to send back the 5 golden tumors. to do a little research on what that might look like. And and basically what most people seem to think for us to visualize is it was probably something about the size of a chicken egg that was gold. And that's probably, you know, visually what it looked like. So if it was the bubonic plague or if it was a gigantic hemorrhoid, whichever one it was you can probably visualize it to be about that size. So 5 of those, and then 5 golden rats. Interesting, right? This is where the tie-in to the bubonic plague comes in pretty heavy for those that believe that, because mice and rats were primary carriers of the bubonic plague. And so they believe that possibly that is why that's in here. And of course 5, the number 5, because that's the number of the cities, the number of the lords that were there. So therefore you shall make images of your tumors and images of your rats that ravage the land. And you shall give glory to the God of Israel. Perhaps he will lighten his hand from you, from your gods, and from your land. So this is going to work. We just know this is going to work if you send those things back. 6, why then do you harden your hearts as the Egyptians and Pharaoh hardened their hearts? When he did mighty things among them, did they not let the people go that they might depart? Interesting that 300 years later, they're still talking about the very details of that story. I mean, really, it is a watershed moment for Israel. We talked about that when we did Exodus and spent a lot of time talking about that. But it was also a watershed moment for the nations of the world, who then saw Israel in a whole new way because of the deliverance of their God. And we talked last week about how over and over and over again, God tells the people, am I not the God who brought you out of Egypt with a mighty outstretched hand? I mean, it was like the comparison to everything that it was. And here we have Philistine priests and diviners saying, don't be like Pharaoh was when he hardened his heart and didn't let the people go. Let this thing go. Don't be the same way. 7, now therefore make a new cart, take 2 milk cows which have never been yoked, and hitch the cows to the cart, and take their calves away from them. I read that to Steve last night and he said, oh, big trouble.
Yeah.
He said, that's big trouble. Right. And so they build a new cart. That's a good thing. They didn't use an old cart, you know, and put this Ark of the Covenant on it. So they build this new one. They take 2 milk cows. They're very specific. God's going to use this. He's going to use this in a mighty way. It's not from their heads, but it's their mouths that these words come, and then God's going to use it. But they take these 2 cows that have never been yoked, so they certainly are going to fight any restraint, right? That's the natural thing. And just to make it harder, they take their calves away from them and send the calves back to the Philistine city, to their home, to wherever it is that the calves were going to go. So what would be the natural instinct of the cows, the mama cows? Follow the babies, right? They're going to want to follow after their babies. Obviously, like Steve said, they're nursing. As soon as they get milk, they're going to be wanting to have their calves, you know, nurse. And not only that, they've not been trained. So the fact that they're yoked, two. So it's not just one walking in its own pace. You've got it. When you have 2, they have to be paced the same, or everything gets thrown off. So they're really stacking the cards against this ark going back on its own. Because if the ark goes back on its own, what they're saying here is, if it goes back on its own, then that means this was God. I mean, you would think all the things we just talked about would say this is God, but they need just a little more proof. And if the ark comes back to our city, then it was just chance. It's just, all this was just bad luck. And so they stack all the cards to make the Ark of the Covenant and the cart and everything come back. So, it says in verse 8, then take the ark of the Lord and set it on the cart, and put the articles of gold in which you are returning to him as a trespass offering in a chest by its side. So the picture is, there's the ark, and then right next to it is something with the, what's in it? 5 golden tumors, 5 golden rats. And those are going to go into the chest and be sitting next to the Ark of the Covenant. Then send it away and let it go. In other words, let's sit back and see what happens. Verse 9, and watch. If it goes up the road to its own territory, to Beth Shemesh, then he has done us this great evil. But if not, we shall know that it is not by his hand that we were struck. It happened to us by chance. All right, Beth Shemesh. Let's talk about that. Beth just means house. Shemesh would be the town of it. This is going to go back to Beth Shemesh. Can anyone tell me, based on what we talked about last week, if you weren't here, you're excused, why it's not going back to Shiloh? Anybody remember?
Where's the temple?
Well, the tabernacle.
I mean, the tabernacle.
Where was it?
In Shiloh.
In Shiloh.
It's still in Shiloh. That's
It
what I
was
meant.
in Shiloh.
The Israelites were, that was their camp, right?
We must just be the closest town to Ekron.
Remember what we talked about? I said it's not in biblical history, but in outside of biblical history, we know that as soon as the battle was won and the ark was captured, and all of the things that we read about happened, very quickly after that time, what happened? Shiloh was destroyed.
Oh.
Shiloh was destroyed, and we know that that's a factual, historical thing that happened. Shiloh was destroyed, and so there isn't going to be anything for them to take it back to Shiloh. And so they're going to the house of Shemesh, Beth Shemesh, and this is where they're going to place it for this period of time. So in verse 10, then the men did so, or they did all that was, we just talked about. They took the 2 milk cows, they hitched them to the cart, and they shut up their calves at home. And they set the ark of the Lord on the cart, and the chest with the gold rats and the images of their tumors. He doesn't call them the tumors, of their tumors, the images of their tumors. Then the cows headed straight for the road to Beth Shemesh, and went along the highway, lowing as they went, or just mooing as they went, and did not turn aside to the right hand or to the left. Okay, let's stop right there for a second and talk about that. Everything that we just read right there is an unnatural event. They immediately took off. Their calves have just been taken. They don't want to go anywhere. They don't want to leave. They're just being yoked onto a cart, 2 of them onto a cart, and it says they didn't go left or right. They have a straight line. They know exactly where they're going. I can envision them walking in unison, and they immediately take off. So the fact that they didn't go to the left or the right is a very unnatural event. They're not going to leave their calves. This is a supernatural event of God. So this is why I'm saying God is going to take all of this that they've set into motion, and he's going to use it to bring glory to him and to accomplish his purposes on what needs to be done. And the lords of the Philistines went after them to the border of Beth Shemesh. So they needed to go. They need to see exactly what's going on. Why? Because if it happened that way, then God had actually accomplished it. If they didn't go to Beth Shemesh, if they take off for the hills and the Ark of the Covenant falls out and the golden tumors fall out, then it was just chance. So they're watching. They're sending their spies watching all of this as it goes in. Now the people of Beth Shemesh were reaping their wheat harvest in the valley. All right, one thing to remember, too, is Beth Shemesh. I'm sorry, I should have told you this. We know from the book of Joshua, chapter 21, that Beth Shemesh is a Levitical city. All right, what does that mean? We know that in all of the different areas, there are certain cities in all of the different tribes where the priests live. They live there. And so Beth Shemesh is a Levitical city. So it's full of what? Priests who are going to be able to accomplish what God needs to have done. And so they're in Beth Shemesh, they're reaping their wheat harvest in the valley. That tells us, that times it for us. That's the May-June harvest. And so we know that it's summer. If if the tabernacle has been on the run for 7 months, then that means that it was throughout the winter months, primarily that it was in Philistine country. So they lift up their eyes, they saw the ark, and they rejoiced to see it. So what do you suppose they're thinking? God has returned. So what does that tell you about the 7 months that the ark was gone? What do you think?
They were grieving, I'm sure. Yeah.
They were grieving. So in their mindset, put yourself in their mindset, what are they thinking?
God's not with us.
God's not with us. He's gone. He's in exile, right? God's in exile right now. He's been defeated. He's being held captive. How does that affect the way they live their lives? This is important because the next thing that they're going to do is based on this. So that's why I'm kind of camping here for a minute and lingering. They're thinking, how can we exist this way? Everything we know is based on our understanding of God being with us, and we're offering sacrifice to him, and he's there to protect us, and God's always there with us. But he got captured. He got taken. Our God isn't as powerful as we thought he was. Very important, because there's coming a time when they're going to turn from the rule of God to the rule of man. So this is setting into motion that very thing. So they saw the ark and they rejoiced. Yes?
Excuse me. Would this be a sanctuary city then?
Not necessarily. It's a Levitical city. It doesn't have to be a sanctuary city. But it is a Levitical city, and there are priests there. And for this part of our chapter, that's going to be really important. And so the cart came into the field of Joshua that was in Beth Shemesh, and it stood there. So the cows just came in to the right field, and they stopped. And a large stone was there. How convenient. So they split the wood of the cart, and they offered the cows as a burnt offering to the Lord. So, sorry cows, you did your job.
Yeah, we're through with you.
But ultimately, they're offered as a burnt offering to the Lord. As the cow, they used the wood of the ark. I mean, everything that the Philistines had sent over on their own, God was able to use in a way that would bring glory to him as they do this. This is the burnt offering is a sin offering. It's consumed. These two cows are totally consumed in that way. So my question to you that is an interesting thing too is, what did the Philistines think was the perfect trespass offering? The 5 tumors and the 5. Did God ever want gold as a trespass offering? Do you ever see any of that? No, the Philistines didn't know that. And so they're taking what's most precious to them, although a golden tumor I'm not getting, but still, what was most precious to them, and this is what they want to offer. But the priests and the people of Israel, it doesn't say anything about the fact that they attempted to make any kind of offering with that, because they know God wants what? Blood sacrifice, right? That's the only thing that can be offered to them. And here is an example of, hey, they did something right. In this case, they're going to mess up again here real quick, but they did something right with that. So the Levites who lived in that area, I'm in verse 15, took down the ark of the Lord and the chest that was with it, in which there were the articles of gold, and they put them on the large stone. Then the men of Beth Shemesh offered burnt offerings and made sacrifices the same day to the Lord. And when the 5 lords of the Philistines had seen it, they returned to Ekron the same day. So they didn't want to interfere. They didn't go in there and do anything, try and take their gold back or anything else. They just wanted to boogie on down and get out of there for what had been done. Verse 17, these are the golden tumors which the Philistines returned as a trespass offering to the Lord. 1 for Ashdod, 1 for Gaza, 1 for Ashkelon, 1 for Gath, and 1 for Ekron. We mentioned before only 3 are mentioned, but obviously all 5 of them were affected. And the golden rats, according to the number of all the cities of the Philistines belonging to the 5 lords, both fortified cities and country villages, even as far as the large stone of Abel on which they set the ark of the Lord, which stone remains to this day in the field of Joshua of Beth Shemesh. Okay, now here's where they mess up again. It doesn't take them long. Verse 19. Then he struck the men of Beth Shemesh because they looked into the ark of the Lord. He struck 50,070 men of the people, and the people lamented because the Lord had struck the people with a great slaughter. All right, so obviously, put yourself once again in their place. It's been gone 7 months. It comes back. Why would they look in the ark?
Cause his stuff was
To
still
see
in.
what was
Or to
there.
see if God was dead.
Okay, there's a lot of ways. You just gave me a lot of really good answers. To see if the stuff was there. Are those important items that they keep in the ark there? That's a really important thing to look at.
See if God was dead.
Is God in there? Is his body somewhere in there? What's going on? They want to check and see if there's anything else. Before they begin to use it in worship again, maybe make sure that the Philistines hadn't put anything inside the ark. We know that the tumors and the rats were in a separate chest. Could something else have been placed in there that shouldn't have been in there? A little idol of Dagon maybe, or something, you know? I mean, if you put yourself in their place, there's a lot of really good reasons why they could have looked in the ark.
They probably also thought because the ark was they were able to take the ark, that God wasn't as strong as they always thought he was.
That's an important next step for us to understand. We know that they think that God has been exiled and that he's come back home. You wonder, now do they think is he as powerful as he's always been? Yes, of course. So they knew better than to look inside the Ark of the Covenant, but they may have had some really understandable reasons why they did it. Was God pleased with that?
No.
You don't need to take it into your own hands, do you? God had told them that it was to be done in a certain way, and they were not to touch it. Who was only to touch the Ark of the Covenant? Who was only to be in the presence of the Ark of the Covenant? The high priest. How often?
Once a year.
Once a year.
Once a year. So, I mean, it's a very important thing that God doesn't, it's to be holy, consecrated, set apart, unique, different. All of those things. And they treated it as a common item, even if it was for a good purpose. The reason why
you can always make it seem right. We do that ourselves.
Absolutely, and I was just going to say, the reason why I bring that up is because I think that today we see a lot of that.
Yes.
I think that we see us going, well, I know that we've always done it this way, but you know what? In order to make it more palatable to people, or in order to make it more friendly to society, or some of those ways, maybe we can just try to change it up a little bit. We can kind of do things a little. Why do you have to have a Bible, really, when when that's intimidating for people? Maybe we could just do it a different way, videos or topical things. Just talk about stuff. Make it more one-on-one. There's no sense in us getting too deep and intimidating things. We can go on and on. You know exactly what I'm talking about. But we have a tendency to do some of that ourselves too, in checking that out. Now, this last verse here where it says that he struck the men of Beth Shemesh in verse 19 because they had looked into the ark, it also can be read in another way, which is that he struck 70 men of the people and 50 oxen of a man. So, I'm just telling you, that's also a secondary interpretation of it. In fact, both of my translations have it that way. It's a huge difference. 50,000 and 70 men. But the way that that's put in here is a little awkward in the Hebrew writing of it. 50,000 and 70 men is an awkward translation. It's an awkward way that it's there. It's being translated as 50,000, 70 men, and it may very well be. I can't tell you that that's not it. I'm saying the alternate way of reading those same words would be 70 men of the people and 50 oxen of a man. So it doesn't change our story whether he slew 70 people or 50,000 and 70 people. It's still a large number, but it appears to me, this is just me, my opinion, is that 50,000 and 70 men, it's going to be hard for all of them to look inside the Ark of the Covenant and actually do what they should have done. 70 men, it would be far easier. Okay, that's just me though. I'm just throwing that out there as my thing. So I kind of lean towards that second translation. It doesn't matter. The important part of the story here is they did what they weren't supposed to do, and immediately God judged them for it.
It'd be surprising if there were 50,000 men in Bethlehem.
Yeah.
In Beth Shemesh, because at the time there was it was a population of around, they estimate around 2,000 people. So why there would be that many more people in the area is kind of
Why would
hard.
there be that many oxen?
50 oxen? Not 50,000, no, 50. And 50 oxen of a man.
Oh,
So,
50
yep,
oxen.
yep, yep. So it's just because, remember, in the Hebrew, only the main important words are there. All the supporting words are missing, and we add them in Hebrew. And so sometimes by just adding in the non-supportive words, we can sort of alter things, and that may be one of the ways it was done here. It really doesn't change the story in that there was great judgment that fell on them. It was a great slaughter, whether it was 70 or whether it was 50,000 and 70. It was a great slaughter for a village of 2,000 people. And verse 20 is kind of jetting us into the next chapter. The men of Beth Shemesh said, "Who is able to stand before this holy Lord God? And to whom shall it go up from us?" So they're kind of in the same situation the Philistines were. Now what do we do? And they sent messengers to the inhabitants of Kirith Jearim and saying, "The Philistines have brought back the ark of the Lord. Come down and take it with you."
Kathy, is there anyone home besides you?
Nope.
Okay.
Why, you heard the
I
door?
heard the door slam. I'm gonna go see what it is.
It could be, yeah, don't know. So they're kind of in the same situation that the Philistines were here, in that they don't want the ark because what happened? Let's just put it this way. A large number of their men were slaughtered for not handling it correctly, and they don't want that responsibility. There is a huge amount of responsibility that comes from handling a holy God, right? I mean, all you have to do is look at how the priests were told to be clothed, how they were to ritually be bathed, how they were to provide certain sacrifices at each thing. God was very specific about how it was all to be handled. There's a great deal, and if it wasn't done that way, that instruction was they are to be cut off from the community. That's another word for kill. So it's very important that things be handled in reverence and in awe. That's another area that I worry sometimes we fall short of sometimes in our worship, is that reverence and awe. I kind of struggle with that a little bit. And God is very specific in that is what he's wanting. So they're back to the point here where they want the Ark of the Covenant to... Did you hear anything?
No, there's no.
So a couple of commentaries have said, so is this legal, kosher, that they can offer a sacrifice without the tabernacle there? We do know that many times in the Old Testament, offerings were made in the high places. And that was perfectly acceptable. And they were made by priests, or the priest of the family sometimes was the patriarch. And so they were made. So there were priests available here. They were done in the correct way. They were in the high places. If Shiloh has been destroyed at this point, which it seems that it was by now, if Shiloh has been destroyed, there's nothing for them to go back to. This was a perfectly legitimate offering for them to have made. I read several commentaries that said God went ahead and accepted it even though it didn't fit the guidelines. Well, actually it does fit the guidelines. You just have to understand that if they couldn't take it back to Shiloh, this was where they started from anyway. And so it was an offering just like that. All right. So let me see if there's anything for this week that I want you to... I included a little segment in your last chapter